Hi everybody, I'm Alison and I'm going to talk to you about Q methodology, why I used it for my PhD research and how I used it for my PhD research. And I'm a part-time student in year 5 at the University of Wolverhampton. So the working title of my research is Exploring the Participation of Vocational Subject Teachers in University Advice and Guidance in School Sixth Forms. My research questions that are informing that working title are threefold in that firstly, I want to look at in what ways do vocational subject teachers participate as sources of university advice in school sixth forms, and how is their role perceived? Secondly, I want to explore what challenges and opportunities do vocational subject teachers, sixth form leaders, and students themselves identify in relating to these subject teachers as sources of university advice. And then thirdly, I'm looking at what types of university advice from their vocational subject teachers do pupils outline as useful and why. So when it came to choosing my research approach, like all researchers, I considered a variety of options. I was obviously aware, having worked in secondary schools for a very long time, very aware of my participants and the nature of the way that pupils and schools and teachers work. Um, and I knew that the study was probably going to be relatively small scale, somewhere between 25 and 30 people. So, sort of on that basis, I looked at a variety of different research methods and I explored the likes of interpretive phenomenological analysis, IPA, and ethnography. And I also looked at Q methodology, and Q was the one that I settled on in the end. And the reasons that I chose Q was that it lent itself very nicely to the needs of my research questions. It fitted with my view of reality and knowledge, in other words, my ontology and epistemology. Um, I felt that Q was a very good way, and I will expand on this a little later. I felt Q was a very good way of enabling my participants to actually take part. And I was also felt that it worked in terms of the practical aspects of my fieldwork, which I'll say I will go on to talk about a little bit later. I mentioned there my philosophical outlook. My ontological outlook is relativist. So, in other words, I believe that reality is dynamic and that multiple realities exist because different individuals perceive what they believe as real in different ways. And my epistemological outlook is that of constructionism. And I believe that our knowledge and interpretation of the world is socially constructed by individuals and the way we interact and we make sense of things. And in fact, Q methodology works very well and lends itself very well to that philosophical outlook, which was one big strength I saw of it. It also enables me to use an interpretivist approach. In other words, I believe in the researcher enabling participants to express their views and interpretation of experiences, but also obviously there would be my own, the researcher interpretation in there. However, I wanted to try and work with the participants, in other words, like co-constructing and making sense of the knowledge together. So this slide I've designed to kind of summarise the reasons why I felt I would use Q methodology and why I felt it would work very well in my research. And on the left-hand side, I've got where I'm looking at why I felt it would benefit participants. And on the right-hand side, I've got how I felt it would work just simply from a practical perspective. So first of all, I felt that the way Q worked enables people to feel very safe and very confident to share their experiences. And in the column next to, so in other words, in the second column along from the left, you can see I've, for each of these things which I'm going to talk to you about, if you want to sort of go and examine that some more, I've put the references in. However, you've got there a selection of researchers who talked about how, because it uses a card sort, it enables people to feel very safe and perhaps express their views by how they're positioning cards as opposed to actually speaking aloud. And that for that reason, it actually makes them perhaps reveal information they might not share with the researcher if they were having to sort of have a conversation either in a group or one-to-one. I felt also that Q was very good because it uses something that's very accessible. In other words, it's a card sort, and it's very familiar to people who work in schools. So pupils are accustomed to using card sorts. It's something that in secondary school teaching and I'm sure primary as well, although I have no experience of primary teaching, but certainly in secondary school teaching, we use card sorts on a fairly frequent basis. They're not unfamiliar to either teachers or pupils. And so the actual physical idea of using a card sort, I felt would make it less intimidating to pupils and very straightforward, and also very sort of like quite a pleasant activity to undertake. It was very kinesthetic. It wasn't as stressful as perhaps sitting and sort of talking about a subject just from cold. And certainly researchers, just going to the point underneath, Shemmings, Alison, Storkson, Lundberg and Hellstrom, Montgomery, etc., they used Q with young people extensively and found that it worked very well with young people, and that they said that they enjoyed working with it and that they engaged with the card sorts very well. It is very simple and quick to explain Q card sorting to people. So once you've, the time consuming element of Q is actually designing the bank of statement cards and getting the wording of those correct and making sure that you feel the wording that you've put on your card sorts actually will help you address the areas you're trying to explore in your research. But once you've done that, actually explaining to people with the materials in front of you how they're going to complete the card sort is actually very quick and easy. And anyone who's worked in schools will tell you how time pressed schools are. And in fact, the fact that it was a research gathering technique which would enable me to gather research quickly, I knew would make it more likely that schools would want to work with me. If I wanted to take students off timetable for too many hours, then I knew from my own experience that wasn't going to be something schools would be attracted to. So from a practical perspective there, it worked, and I thought it would be a good idea. And I also felt, finally, there on the left-hand side, bottom left, again, because it was a method that was secure, confidential, it was very easy to work with from a safeguarding perspective. There wasn't going to be me one-to-one with a pupil at any point during this research. It was going to be me with the materials and a group of students, each of whom had their own individual card sort in a room. Therefore, there was no one-to-one. Therefore, there wasn't going to be any safeguarding risks to any young people during the research. And again, when I did a focus group with pupils as a follow-up, it was a group activity. So I felt that the approaches of Q would be attractive again to schools because they wouldn't have to be concerned about any safeguarding issues about me as a researcher working with their students. In terms of the third column along and fourth columns along, the practical elements, the reasons I chose Q. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Q works, and if you look, there's a brilliant book by Watson Stenner called Doing Q Methodological Research, So in that book, they explain how Q methodology sits really comfortably with constructionist epistemologies and relativism in terms of ontology. It is, in my view, it is a very qualitative methodology. There are other Q methodologists who would have a slightly different view of that, but in my view, it's a very qualitative methodology. So therefore, it was going to enable me to undertake qualitative research and take an interpretive approach to it. I mentioned about time. It's very quick, particularly with the pupils, where I was able to gather data from a number of pupils in one go. So it's, if you've got busy participants, it works really well. It promotes participants' views, but they can do their card sorts without interference from the researcher. So the initial data gathering through the card sort is very much participant led, with minimal interference by the researcher. And then the researcher obviously takes the card sorts away and does the data analysis. But that then I took the data analysis back to participants in the form of focus groups for pupils and follow-up interviews with staff. At which point my interpretation was sort of being discussed with participants. And so the knowledge that we were creating in terms of the understanding about how teachers are participating in university advice and guidance, and what the challenges and the opportunities are, and what the best methods are, all of that was being co-constructed between myself and my interpretations, but being sort of discussed and validated by the participants. And finally, Q works really well with small to medium-sized studies. In fact, Brown would tell you Q can even be done with one person, and it has even been done with one person. Equally, it can be done with very large studies, although there can be logistical elements with that. But it can and has many times been done with large studies. However, it suits itself really well to medium-sized, small to medium-sized studies. And as mine was going to be between 25 and 30 participants, it was going to work really well for me. Further reasons that I chose Q was that the Q analysis identifies areas of shared perspectives from your participants. And that was what I was trying to see. I was trying to see, there were three stakeholders in schools that I was discussing this topic with. Where were the common views that they held in terms of what picture did they have of how vocational subject teachers were participating in school university advice processes? Equally, obviously, if you're looking at the areas of commonality in views, it was inevitable that there were elements that came out of the research process where I was able to see there were nuances and there were exceptional views. But the principle behind Q is that you find out the shared views, and so that made it that it was going to work really well for me. And as I mentioned all along, my intention was to take a very qualitative, interpretative approach, and Q methodology enables the researcher to add on additional research after a card sort is undertaken and analysed. And that was very much what I was interested in doing, because I knew that the Q card sort analysis would probably give me some insight into people's views, but then I would have further questions on that, almost like a sort of, Q was going to give me a doorway for me as a researcher to do further qualitative research with participants. And it was going to be my way in to discussing what their views were. And there's a quote there at the bottom from Brown, where he saw Q as a launch pad for an investigation, the researcher's best initial guess, to engage in a collaborative manner in a dialogue with the participants. And that was very much what I was trying to achieve, or what I am trying to achieve, as I am now sort of towards the latter stages of my research. Just here, this sort of slide, getting towards the end now, I these are just the steps that I went through, how I used Q methodology in my research. So first of all, I conducted my card sort, having designed the card sort, um, with my mixed staff and pupil participants across 3 separate schools. There were 27 participants. I used principal component analysis as my factor analysis method with varimax rotation, and I used PQ method as the software package which I put all my card sorts into in order to undertake the factor analysis. Using PQ method, I extracted 4 discrete factors. I interpreted those factors using Watson-Stenner's crib sheet method. I then undertook follow-up interviews with the adult participants to learn more about why they felt they loaded on their particular factor. And I undertook follow-up focus groups with pupils to explore their views based on the 4 factors that emerged. I then thematically analysed these interviews and focus groups, and 6 themes have emerged from that thematic analysis. And the hope is that these will complement and augment the information gleaned from the 4 factors. In other words, the thematic analysis is the why people feel the way they do about how they experience participation of vocational teachers in university advice processes, as opposed to the what. The what they felt came from the Q card study. The why, I feel, has come from the follow-up interviews and research. I shared the formation of the themes with the participants in order to solicit their views on my interpretation of the interviews and the focus groups. So I'm very keen that as I'm writing things up, that I'm not just, I haven't just undertaken interviews or focus groups and then I'm writing up my own opinion of what I thought people were meant. I have actually gone back to a small sample of the participants and showed them drafts of my writing to sort of make sure that they feel that how I'm interpreting what they're saying is really what they feel and what they mean or what they meant when they were talking to me. Then I've reflected on what they're saying, and I'm writing up my thematic analysis based on the participant feedback. And so those 9 steps, if you like, are from the card sort, taking you through to the sort of final stage of writing up thematic analysis of the interviews and focus groups. And finally, I'm sure that Zita will arrange that if people want to, we can share slides, but these are my references. And just to finish off with, I'll say thank you very much, and any questions.